Hello, I'm Mark from Moonstone Publications. Should advisors and trustees rethink their investment strategies to accommodate the Twopart retirement system? I discussed this question with Andrew Davison, the Head of Institutional Business at Old Mutual Multi-Managers. The Twopart system aims to balance access to savings with preservation, allowing fund members to make annual withdrawals from their savings components, while funds in the retirement component must go towards purchasing an annuity. Join us as we explore how these changes could impact fund investment strategies. In the one-pot world, the thinking was that the full amount should be invested for retirement, even though many members were, unfortunately, making withdrawals before retirement. The two-pot world seems to make a stronger case for the view that retirement funds' investment strategies must accommodate two different objectives: short-term savings and long-term savings.
There are two camps, I think, of people or views. One that says, you know what, even though there are these two quite different objectives, in essence, we still want to encourage people to take a long-term view on all of the assets, all of the savings. We don't really want to encourage people to take money out of the savings pot. The fact that they can doesn't mean that they should. And the other camp says, you know what, the reality is that a lot of people are going to take their savings pot on a regular basis, possibly even annually. So that is a very short-term objective. So the investment strategy should reflect that. But then, depending on which of those two camps you're in, there are a bunch of other considerations that you then need to think about.
It's early days in the two-pot world, and much of the focus is on how much members have been withdrawing since the 1st of September. Have we got enough information about how members are adapting to the new system to warrant changing investment strategies?
Yeah, I think that's a key question. And I think to some extent, most people in the industry, and by people I mean trustees and other decision makers, whether that's consultants or the like, they have been saying, let's wait and see what happens. Let's get an idea of the behavior of members in relation to these pots before we decide on the investment strategy. So I don't think there's been a rush to revisit investment strategies. I do think it's important to think through some of these things and some of these considerations to make sure that actually your investment strategy as a fund is still appropriate. And by strategy, remember, strategy encompasses quite a number of different things. The default is one, and then if you do offer choice, the choices are an important consideration. So as I say, I do think it's important to maybe distinguish between the default and what is offered as choice. I think it might be, currently a lot of choices are still balanced funds. They're still fairly long-term options. It might be that some funds might want to introduce choices that are income funds, cash plus, where people can park money that maybe do want to access it, but it's a member choice as opposed to a default that members find themselves in. And one of the things that is difficult about a default is you have to obviously choose something for a group of members that are different, with different objectives. You've got some members that are not going to want to take their savings pot, others that are. How do you have one strategy to fit all of that?
One of the arguments against adopting a short-term investment strategy for the savings component is that it signals to members that this component is for short-term savings and it is acceptable to make regular withdrawals.
The reality is that most people should still be trying to leave as much of that savings pot for retirement. Even the fact that you are going to have to use the 2/3 for an annuity means that you are no longer, like in the old world, going to have a lump sum at retirement. The lump sum is the 1/3 that you're putting in your savings pot. So if you don't leave any of it for retirement, there is not going to be any lump sum at retirement. And that in itself is an important thing for members to understand. So because a lot of people do have a use for some sort of lump sum at retirement. And I think it is very valuable to have some sort of savings that are outside of an annuity as part of your retirement planning.
Pension and provident funds have always had to provide for pre-retirement withdrawals. Although the introduction of the savings component means regular withdrawals are built in, as it were, at the same time, early withdrawals from the vested component should taper off over time. If funds have managed without a short-term investment strategy to accommodate early withdrawals, do they need one now?
That is the argument, or it's one of the arguments, and I think there's some merit in that. I think, as you say, we've always said people, that's your retirement savings. The fact that you might take it every 5 years because you change jobs, it's not going to be a short-term strategy because you happen to be withdrawing when you change jobs. But I do think that, and again, I think it's also important to say it's not the case that this is a whole new world with an entirely different investment strategy. I think at the very most, there are opportunities to do a few things slightly differently.
Davison believes that one of those opportunities concerns how the retirement component is invested. Members cannot access the savings in this component until they retire. Now that funds have greater assurance that savings in the retirement component will be invested for the long term, the investment strategy can include more illiquid assets that have the potential to provide higher returns.
I think the key is that the liquidity is now no longer so much of an issue in the retirement pot, because you don't need that pot to be liquid. Because members can't access it. The one thing why it is important to think about some liquidity in the retirement pot is obviously members can still transfer from one fund to another. So you still may have to liquidate assets to transfer a member, but I think the fact that they can't actually touch that pot means that those assets are going to be a lot stickier. They're going to be there, and hence the liquidity becomes less of an issue. Not it doesn't go away, but it is and by implication that means I think we can bring more unlisted assets into investment strategies, private equity, infrastructure, other impact investments that are grassroots focused, as opposed to listed assets where it's much more people trading existing assets. They don't have the same impact on the ground as something where you're building a brand new thing in the unlisted space.
Davison points out that illiquid and unlisted assets are more difficult to understand and require additional due diligence and skill on the part of trustees and consultants. They are also more expensive than listed assets.
So there's a fee element that needs careful consideration, because obviously if the fee is so high that it erodes that additional return, well, then you end up without any real benefit from that type of asset in the portfolio.
The compulsory annuitization of the retirement component may also provide an opportunity for changes to Lifestage strategies.
I do think maybe there's some room to make some adjustment to Lifestage strategies, because in the past you had a situation where you didn't really know how much lump sum someone was going to take at retirement. So the final phase of the Lifestage now needed to potentially say, well, do I need to cater for the fact that 1/3 could go as cash, the other 2/3 goes into a pension? We've had the introduction of annuity strategies by funds in the last few years. Potentially, because we know the retirement pot is going 100% into an annuity, a Lifestage strategy that caters for that maybe ignores, the savings pot. Well, not ignores it, but the investment strategy, the Lifestage strategy says we're assuming that this is going into an annuity strategy. So in other words, there's a more seamless transition from pre to post. And one of the things that I think is important about Lifestage strategies is not to be too conservative very close to retirement. It is the time when people have got the most assets. And it is also the time when people's time horizon is not as short as they think it is. There is a fixation on I'm turning 65, that's my time horizon, when actually your time horizon is potentially 30 years, depending on how long you're going to live. It is an unknown time horizon. And I think maybe this is an opportunity, again, just to tweak some life stage strategies that maybe can be more focused on the transition into the annuity phase, as opposed to saying, how much do I need to make available for the lump sum?
One of the considerations when adopting different investment strategies for different components is the impact on the overall retirement plan.
If you're too conservative, even in the savings pot, you do potentially limit the potential returns. As you know, compound interest and all of that. Most members need CPI plus 5, at least, per annum, to be able to get a decent replacement ratio. And the reason for that is obviously we can't save enough of our salary. If we were saving 30% of salary, you wouldn't need CPI plus 5. The maths would work out differently. But if you don't want to save 30% of your salary, you need CPI plus 5. So as soon as you're putting too much of that money, let me say, in something earning CPI plus 1, like cash, well, now you've got an implication for your overall plan. Something's not, the maths is no longer adding up. And so you either need to take a lot more risk on the other piece, and then you've got Regulation 28 that limits the amount of risk that you can take.
Adopting a conservative investment strategy for the savings component means that the assets in the retirement component will have to be invested more aggressively to ensure members earn the returns they need. Members might not accept the resulting volatility.
And even if you're saying, well, it's a long-term piece, people can afford to have a more volatile strategy, I don't think it's as simple as that, because people are still, they still worry about the volatility and they worry about their value going up and down. So you don't want something that is excessively risky there, because you're now trying to cater for the fact that you've gone very conservative over here.
And one also has to consider the Regulation 28 implications.
Let's just say you have this 1/3 in cash. Because of the fact that people might take all of that, the other 2/3 also has to be Reg 28 compliant, because otherwise if the cash portion gets taken out, the savings pot, the member is now no longer compliant. And remember, Reg 28 compliance applies at member level. So even the other pot can't afford to be not Reg 28. So in other words, it also needs to have quite a big chunk in cash and fixed income. And so you end up with 1/3 in cash and fixed income, and then 1/3 of the 2/3. So you end up with 50% in cash and bonds, and you're just not going to get enough return.
Adopting different investment strategies for the components has cost implications.
Fees are so important for the accumulation of assets. They are a leak from your asset accumulation, obviously. So it's very, very important to keep them low. And one of the things that you can do to keep them low is not make the service providers that you have work harder for what you want. So in other words, keep things simple.
If advisors and trustees do want different investment strategies for the savings and retirement components, they should check whether the fund administrator can implement this, because many administrators currently do not have the systems to administer different strategies.
It's not something that is currently in place for a lot of administrators, particularly the administrators of occupational schemes. I think in the retail space, so RAs and preservation funds, those administrators are probably more able to deal with that. But certainly a lot of pension and provident fund EB administrators don't have the systems to do that right now.
Although much of the focus has been on the ability to access the savings component every year, as Davison points out, the benefit of the two-pot system is the compulsory preservation of the 2/3 of contributions in the retirement component. Calculations by life insurers and fund administrators indicate that, over the long term, this will result in a doubling of the average replacement ratio.
And I think that's what we need to focus on as an industry. We need to say, how can we take these rules and work with them to make sure that we bank those better outcomes for members. I think it would be unfortunate if we just said, you know what, nothing's changed, we're just carrying on with the same as what we've had. I don't think it's a case of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying this strategy is no longer appropriate at all, but I do think it's a case of saying, are there any improvements that we can make just to incrementally add to the replacement ratios that our members are getting out of funds?